Well, sticking on Europe, let us hear from David Davis, former Brexit secretary, now wants to take a harder line with the EU. I spoke to him earlier. Remember, he's voting now, so he's otherwise engaged. He really wanted to speak to us about immigration detentions, and we will play that part of the interview. We'll do that a bit later. But on Brexit, I asked him if he is satisfied that no deal is still on the table.
The wording the government put down, this was supposed to be a neutral motion. I was the minister who pretty much insisted these things had to be neutral motions, and it should have been take note or something like that. Instead, it appeared to support all the motions passed a week or so ago, including Caroline Spellman's motion, which was aspirational about taking the no deal off the table. It wasn't binding in any way, but it indicated it didn't want no deal. Truth is, we're in the middle of a negotiation, we're actually in the end of a negotiation, the highest pressure component of a negotiation, when having no deal there is probably what will bring the European Union back to the table either next week or the week after or the week after that. If you look at European newspapers, you're seeing all of a sudden the Swedes, the Irish, the Germans suddenly starting taking this very seriously, and that will alter the tenor of the negotiations and make the European Union, I think, a bit more sensible about what it does.
But I'm surprised you, as such a eminent parliamentarian, a supporter of the sovereignty of Parliament, believes the government should ignore the express will of Parliament that said just a couple of weeks ago with that Caroline Spellman amendment, we do not want no deal. Well, and if you can avoid it and do anything to avoid it, which probably you can by delaying Article 50, you must do that.
Yeah, no, it was more exhortatory than that. I mean, at the time, I remember on the day, everybody was saying this is not a binding, this is an aspirational thing.
No, but it's the will of Parliament clearly expressed, and you're saying government just ignore the will of Parliament. Come on, that's exactly what you're doing.
No, we're not. The first thing to say is, yes, I'm a parliamentarian. Yes, I think that Parliament should be taken seriously. And why is that? Because we represent the people. However, we're trumped by one thing, and that's the 17.5 million people who voted to leave. Anything that looks like we're reneging on that is not a good idea. My view is, obviously we want to avoid no deal. Nobody likes the prospect, but it's a part of a negotiation, and you can't have 650 people, as it were, jogging the government's elbow at every stage in this most sensitive part of the negotiation.
Looking over the Brexit process, the whole period, have you and your side made any mistaken judgments in their calls on how Brexit would proceed?
If you read my resignation letter, you can see that I say the Prime Minister should have chosen a very different approach to the negotiation from the beginning, insisting on everything being done in parallel rather than doing the EU's bit first and our bit second. We should not have conceded the language on Northern Ireland because it ran us into this cul-de-sac. Quite sizable strategic errors, each of which I have to tell you I raised at the time.
You have also been guilty, and not just you. I'm not trying to make this personal, but I'll use your quotes rather than everyone else's because I'm talking to you. You have been guilty of the most astonishing optimism over how this process would go. And I wonder whether people would be entitled to think you're still being too optimistic. So, for example, you said, we'll get a large trade area bigger than the European Union, probably 10 times the size. Before the negotiation with the EU is likely to be complete, we can negotiate a free trade area massively larger than the EU. You said the £40 billion was a made-up figure. You suggested we wouldn't be paying it. You said we're not really interested in a transition deal. We'll consider one to be kind to the EU. These show the most sort of astonishing, almost reckless bravado in the whole process. That the question is why anyone would need to trust your judgment now about the risks you're suggesting the country take.
Well, take the last one first. I mean, the transition deal. What was happening throughout of this process was the European Union was equally interested in a transition deal. And the last thing I wanted to do was to make us the demandeurs in the process. And that's pretty much what we worked our way around. We ended up in March of last year agreeing an implementation period on the basis of what we both wanted, not what one or the other wanted, because otherwise there would have been a price put on it. I mean, quite a big price put on it. The European Union did try and put a price on it.
They weren't fooled. David, they weren't fooled at all. They knew we needed a transition. It didn't do anything.
No,
the kind of bravado of saying we might give them one.
That wasn't the experience of the negotiating chamber, I'm afraid. That wasn't the experience. That's not right. You hear in this process, Evan, lots and lots of people say, oh, you said this or you said that. I'll give you one example. I'll give you one much more dramatic one, where people accuse accused me of saying, oh, there's no downside to Brexit. Actually, I said, if we achieve the four main negotiating aims, continued access to the single market, new access to markets outside Europe, and the two foreign policy and the security sides, then there'd be no downside. People take that and tear out
well,
a
I
piece
didn't
of
take that
it.
one.
No,
I actually didn't take that one because I want to be very careful. So you've picked one that I didn't pick, but the ones I have picked are such gross errors of judgment in retrospect, because what we have actually found is we are unable on time to roll over existing trade deals, let alone negotiate new ones.
Oh, I think you're being a little premature in that. Let's
no,
wait.
come on. Neil Fox said we'll have 40 of them by March the 29th, and we are not going to have 40 of them by March the 29th. Well, they're stumbling along. We might have half that, but it's not going to be.
That's what he says, and I think you'll find that the ones he'll have are the ones which are massively the most important. It's a Pareto. You'll know what I mean when I say a Pareto rule here. The big ones will be done. Some of the tiny ones probably won't be.
We're not going to leave on March the 29th, though, are we?
Oh, yes, I think we are. That's exactly what I asked the minister today with respect to actually voting for the business in front of the House. I said, in the event we don't get a decent deal out of the European Union, are we still going to leave on the 29th? And somebody else asked, even if it's no deal? And he said yes to all of the above. So I think we are leaving on 29th of March.
David